Hello, I'm Stephen Kyle and welcome to The Angry Moderate. Today we're going to talk about using statistics in an honest way to strengthen an argument and how to avoid the pitfalls when two sides try to beat each other up with facts. A friend once told me that facts are meaningless because each side has their own stats to back up their case. So there's no way to get to the truth of things. In part it's because 92% of statistics are made up on the spot. I understand the frustration, but disagree with the conclusion. I think that not all facts are equal. So what do we do when statistics conflict? Do we throw up our hands and say truth is relative? No. We need to apply common sense, which sometimes means going on a statistical treasure hunt. And the real-world topic we'll use to demonstrate some of these ideas is the question, are teachers underpaid? And I'll just mention this once, but all of the studies and stats I use for this video are linked in the description below. It's commonly believed that teachers are underpaid, but is this true? The stats seem to say so. The media talks a lot about a, quote, teacher pay gap, but is it real? The annual Economic Policy Institute report on the teacher pay gap finds a gap of 21%, meaning it appears teachers make 21% less than they should. Stats concept number one. Most statistics that deal with a specific group should withstand identical analysis of plugging in different groups and seeing the deltas. In other words, applying the exact same statistical model to groups in other fields yields some interesting results. Nurses are overpaid by 29%. Telemarketers have a 26% penalty. Aerospace engineers make 38% too much, while sports coaches and umpires are paid 21% less than they should. Firefighters, those freeloaders, make 25% more than they should. If most professions are grossly overpaid or underpaid by this model, then maybe the model doesn't account for all of the factors it should. The problem is that EPI compares teacher salaries with other people who have roughly the same education and demographic background, age, education, location, and marital status, among others. This model cannot measure differences among workers in different occupations. The model therefore fails in that salaries in the real world are determined by supply and demand for specific skills that vary across occupation even after controlling for education. Stats concept number two. Never rely on a single piece of statistical data to legitimize a point of view. If you are correct, then there should be corroborating data available from other sources. The EPI study is the only one that I've really seen that shows teachers are underpaid. But if there is other evidence to support it, I'd love to look at it. So post a link in the comments section if you're aware of any. Not only is it the only data point, but there are other problems with the EPI data as well. In part, they base pay rate on education level, and teachers with more formal education earn more, but that doesn't make them better teachers. One of the most consistent findings in education research is that teachers with master's degrees are no more effective in the classroom. A good teacher is a good teacher, regardless of education level. EPI also understates benefits like pension. According to the National Income and Product Accounts, teachers received benefits, inclusive of future pension benefits, equal to 45% of their salary. In the private sector, benefits only average 19%. This metric alone is enough to negate a salary penalty of up to 17%. Texas A&M economist Lori Taylor found that teachers are twice as likely to live in rural areas, where cost of living tends to be lower. So controlling tightly for geography reduces the pay gap by another 9%. So much for the EPI data. But if that isn't a good measure of what teachers should be making, then what is? Stats concept number three. Where possible, favor large-scale studies and true research over univariate data, which just means data that only uses a single data point for analysis. The Bureau of Labor Statistics assessed the skill requirements of hundreds of U.S. occupations, grading them on the GS schedule, which is used in setting federal salaries, and concludes that teaching demands roughly a GS 8. Only half of occupations are paid within 10% of what their profession's BLS grade predicts. In other words, it's normal for occupational salaries to be above or below what the occupational skill requirements might predict. And we can hardly assume that every deviation is evidence that an occupation is improperly paid. Under the BLS stats, teachers actually get a salary premium of 9% once their shorter work year is accounted for. Seems compelling, right? Not so fast. As responsible moderates, we need to recognize that at this point we have not demonstrated that there is no pay gap. All we have demonstrated is that those claiming a pay gap exists haven't met their burden of proof in order to justify massive across-the-board salary increases. It's entirely possible that a pay gap exists, but the EPI numbers commonly used to demonstrate this aren't compelling for the reasons we've just addressed. If there were a salary gap, we should see specific indicators of this in terms of labor market predictions. Stats concept number 4. Accumulate data from many sources and don't just rely on one source for all of your statistical needs. If teachers were underpaid, we would expect large numbers of teachers to quit due to salary and benefits. We find that teachers, in fact, quit their jobs at much lower rates than private sector workers. According to the Job Openings and Labor Turnover Survey, JOLTS, even though quit rates among teachers are high right now, they are low relative to other occupations. Quitting in this survey doesn't only mean leaving a profession, it may also mean moving to a different teaching position. According to the most recent school and staffing survey, only 7.5% are truly leaving the profession, including retirees and people moving to administrative roles. The most common reason teachers give for leaving the profession is, quote, personal life factors, with only 5% citing salary and other job benefits as their motivation. If teachers were underpaid, we would expect large wage gains when they move to the private sector. Analysis of the Survey of Income and Program Participation finds that teachers moving to a new career earn an average of 3% less in their new jobs. If teachers were underpaid, we would expect to find large-scale teacher shortages. Although claims abound about teacher shortages, the facts don't support these assertions. Since the mid-'80s, claims of shortages or imminent shortages have not actually occurred. Most recently, the Learning Policy Institute said a dire shortage of teachers is coming in 2016. The facts show that in the 4 years leading up to 2016, teachers' employment grew by 400,000, even as the number of students remained constant. Shortages do exist in specific districts and in particular subject areas, but this is not evidence of a widespread teacher shortage. If teachers were underpaid, we would expect to see a large number working second jobs. The National Teacher and Principal Survey finds that 18% of teachers have second jobs. The Current Population Survey sets that number at 14%, which is barely above the 11% national average. And only 2 to 3% of teachers' income comes from secondary work. Well, what about the intangibles? For example, that teachers' work is especially demanding and stressful. That is undoubtedly true. But other occupations can be difficult too. Manufacturing jobs deal with shift work. Salesmen constantly travel. Lawyers sleep in offices. The American Time Use Survey finds that teachers work an average of 40.6 hours per week, in contrast to private sector professionals who work 42.4 hours per week on average. The BLS Occupational Information Network, ONET, looks at 1,000 occupations on job characteristics like consequences of error, the importance of being exact, the level of competition, time pressure, responsibility for outcomes, and finds that teaching is a middle-of-the-pack occupation. Nurses, who are overpaid according to EPI, rank much higher in these ONET requirements. Job stability is another intangible that needs to be accounted for. A 2017 Brookings Institute report found that wage inequality among public school teachers is far lower than in any other occupations. By nearly any measure, teaching is a more stable occupation than private sector alternatives. So why is there a disconnect then between perception and reality? Well, Because despite all data to the contrary, the media sensationalizes stories of teacher struggles. Time magazine ran an article last year about how teachers can barely put food on the table. The data, however, simply does not support those anecdotes. And it's a good lesson to remember that the plural of anecdote is not data. The Federal Reserve study of household economics and decision-making found that 81% of teachers are, quote, living comfortably, while just 2.7% are finding it hard to get by, equivalent to the national average. Stats concept number 5. Two pieces of data that appear contradictory can often be reconciled given proper context. Example. A recent report said teachers' salaries are $1,000 lower than in 1989 after adjusting for inflation. But the National Center for Education Statistics shows salaries increasing substantially. What's the disconnect? There is none. Both sets of statistics are true, but to harmonize them, we have to remember that the teacher workforce has grown younger as baby boomer era teachers retire. So the average teacher has fewer years of experience and therefore a lower salary than they did in 1989. But teacher salaries across every category of experience have risen sharply since that time. I'll do a video later on some of the common traps we fall into when trying to interpret data. There are a lot of them. Summing it all up, the 21% salary gap is a meaningless statistic. Teachers rarely quit, and when they do, they don't cite money as a reason. Only a tiny percentage of their salaries come from secondary jobs. There is no generalized teacher shortage. Most teachers live comfortable middle-class lives. Their jobs are not more stressful or time-consuming than the average job. There is no evidence to show that teachers as a group are underpaid. Teaching is a profession whose compensation is weighted less toward salaries and more toward retirement benefits and shorter work years. If anything, teachers may be overpaid in that they don't tend to earn as much in the private sector. The lesson here is that policymakers should be wary of across-the-board pay raises. Those increases will go to current teachers, making them less likely to quit or retire, shrinking the pool of new teachers entering the classroom. New teacher quality is already rising across the country as school districts improve the applicant screening processes. Again, none of this is proof that teachers are paid adequately. It is still possible that teachers are underpaid, but we make decisions based on the data and not our hunches. You might be thinking, given all this data, Steve, how can you say teachers still might be underpaid? Simple. Because I'm not making a claim about the state of teachers' salaries, either being too low or otherwise. I'm simply rejecting the claim that teachers are underpaid. And there's a big difference between those two things. Let me hypothesize how the data might one day show that teachers are underpaid. School shootings. The BLS, ONET, remember they look at the stress and intangibles of thousands of jobs. Now, while statistically the chance that any given school will be the victim of a mass shooting is low, their data may not properly account for the psychological cost of teachers knowing that at any moment they may be asked to lay down their lives for their students. So it's possible there is a psychological cost that isn't being properly accounted for. Special ed. The additional time and attention that special ed kids need are not always sufficiently accounted for when calculating a fair salary. Budget shortfalls. Many teachers operate in school systems where there are insufficient funds to handle all of a student's classroom needs. These teachers take money from their own pocket to accommodate these students. We all know of teachers that do this, and they don't all get new cars and big checks on the Ellen DeGeneres show, just the lucky ones. These factors, among others, may one day show there is a teacher shortage. Stats concept number 6. Always be willing to re-examine the data and open the door to new data. None of this is written in stone, and although I say today I do not believe teachers are underpaid, we must always be willing to revisit an issue when new information comes to light. Now, there are practical solutions to our education problem. Merit pay proposals imply that teachers are somehow to blame for the state of education, and most rightly bristle at these kinds of solutions. In reality, outside factors play a huge role in educational success. Psychologist Douglas Detterman finds students themselves account for up to 90% of the variance of educational success. The problem is that this argument cuts both ways, as you can't claim that teachers are in some sense powerless to the outside forces and at the same time demand higher salaries. As for real solutions, number one, differential pay. Most unions require that gym teachers be paid the same as calculus teachers. Differential pay lets prospective teachers know that some fields are in greater demand than others. Across-the-board increases offer no incentive for incoming teachers to focus in areas of need. Number two, mobility. Districts must stop shortchanging teachers that transfer into their system. Example, a 15-year teacher entering the Detroit school system makes $18,000 less than if given full credit for their work history. Teacher pensions, likewise, discourage mobility across state lines and even within a state. Portable retirement plans, like a cash balance plan or 401k style plan, would not punish teachers that move from one place to another. Number three, overprotection. Firing poor-performing teachers has become difficult to the point of absurdity. New York City has an annual budget of $150 million for teachers that can't teach but can't be fired. Absurd. Firing the least productive 5% of teachers would move students into more effective classrooms. Teachers rightly ask to be treated as professionals, but there is no other professional occupation in which incompetence is met with the promise of employment in perpetuity. Well, except government work. The bottom line is that the statistics all tell us that focusing on across-the-board raises distracts us from more useful reforms. More generally, we can extrapolate the following principles. Most statistics that deal with a specific group should withstand identical analysis of plugging in different groups and seeing the deltas. Multiple pieces of corroborating information is better than a single counter instance. Studies are generally preferable to surveys and simple statistical data because the latter are more easily manipulated. Two pieces of data that appear contradictory can often be reconciled given proper context. Finally, always be open to new data that may change your view on a given issue. The point is not to throw stones at our teachers, the best of whom bring out the best in us, but rather to talk about statistics in a more general way and how we can learn to use them more effectively. And I hope your ability to utilize statistics in your own discussions increases by at least 12%. If you agree with all this, click like now. If you disagree with me and think I'm an idiot, click subscribe. That'll teach me. Thanks for watching.